Hi, this is Seven Daughters and Seven Sons, Part 3, Chapter 1. Years have passed since Buran inscribed her tale with her own hand. Ink grows dim, and paper crumbles. Some of what she wrote is as sharp and clear as the day she put it down. Other pages are lost forever. But for one who reads with the heart as much as with the eyes, mysteries dissolve. For such a one, imagination supplies what time has destroyed. Was he really ill, my prince, or was he just pretending? He'd been testing me for several days. I was sure of that. This fever, this weakness that had suddenly overcome him, could be part of the test. On the other hand, I couldn't deny that something was wrong. His eyes glittered unnaturally, his hands shook. He may not have been ill, but he was certainly under a great strain, and the effect was the same. I wanted nothing more than to tell him the truth. I wanted nothing more than to wrap my arms around him, press my body close to his, cover his face with kisses, and then say, "My lord, I am a woman." But if I said that to him, how he would hate me for my lies and my deceit, he who was the most honorable of men. He already suspected that I was something different from what I claimed to be. Soon he'd have to know the truth. Then our glorious friendship would be over. It wasn't only the fact that I deceived him that would end it. That was bad enough, for he was more than a little pompous, very full of his own position, and wouldn't like to think he'd been made a fool of. But it was also the fact that men and women can't be friends in the way we'd been friends, or, at least, so we'd both always been told. And since it would all be over soon, I gave him the promise he wanted. I told him that, yes, I would join him at the public bath when he was better. Did he imagine he was being clever in feigning illness to extract such a promise from me? I wondered. We had both involved ourselves in so many layers of deception that it was hard enough for me to tell what I myself was feeling, let alone figure out what was in his mind. But that's not how it had been in the beginning. In the beginning, we'd played backgammon and joked in the shops and walked along the quay in an exchange of feelings and ideas that was as free and open as the companionship between two gulls soaring above the harbor. Amin and Uthman had been with us all the time at first, but after a while it was always Mahmoud and I who walked side by side in front of the other two, or behind them. It was Mahmoud and I who sat opposite each other over the backgammon board, laughing and joking over our own game, oblivious to the one going alongside us. And then came the long walks at night, alone together on the quay, Uthman and Amin not there at all, but off in some other place. Of course, the four of us still spent time together. I brought a horse and rode with them at least twice a week. Gindar and Abu Sinan had been back to Tira 3 times since my arrival, and it was Gindar who had served as my riding instructor. He had taught me well. But I never hunted. Managing a bow and an arrow from the back of a horse was really a skill that had to be practiced from childhood. God be praised, I didn't have to make up excuses for not joining them when they hunted or played polo. They knew I came from a poor family and wouldn't have learned rich men's sports. Early one morning, we were riding through low brown hills which began their rise from the plain about 5 miles inland. The track was steep and rough, but it was a ride we enjoyed because it used all our skill, and because when we got to the top of the hill, we could see on one side a valley rich with lush green farms, and on the other the stretch of sandy soil along which we had come. The city of Tira, with its white and blue domes scraping the sky, and beyond that, the sunlight on the dancing sea. We reached our favorite hilltop and dismounted. Amin and Uthman led the horses to a flat, grassy area where we usually tethered them when we came to this spot, so they could graze while we drank in the view, gossiped, and discussed life's deepest meanings, all at the same time. Uthman rejoined Mahmud and me quickly, telling us that Amin's horse was in a lather and that Amin was rubbing him down. I hadn't noticed that Amin's mount had suffered from the uphill climb any more than ours, nor had I ever known Amin to take unusual care of his animal, but at the time I really didn't think anything of it. It was only afterwards that I remembered. Later, we rode back down. Going up a hill is physically exhausting, but going down is far more dangerous. The track, which wound its way steeply around boulders and clumps of thorn trees, was littered with stones, dead branches, and unexpected swellings of earth. We would have been better off on donkeys than on horses, but, of course, no young man with a reputation for courage and high spirits would have been caught dead on the back of a donkey. We were clattering downward, single file, Mahmud in the lead, I in the rear, when I suddenly felt my horse's rear right leg give away. The animal collapsed and slid forward, and I was thrown into the bracken on the far side of the track. Amin had pulled far ahead of me. It flashed through my mind that Amin was lucky. Had he been close to me, my sliding horse would have crashed into him and sent him flying too. I let out a scream, a high-pitched scream, as I fell to the earth, not because I was hurt, but because I was so surprised. The others heard me and reined in. I sat up slowly, clutching my arms about me, as if, somehow, to keep myself safe. I realized that my luck had held. If I had fallen to the left instead of the right, I could have gone over the edge of a deep ravine, landing in its stony bottoms, my arms and legs broken at best. At worst, my head split open and my brains spilled all over the sharp-pointed rock. In a moment, Mahmud was at my side. He put his arm around my shoulder. "Nazir, are you all right?" His voice was breathless with fear and concern. "What happened?" I shook my head. I didn't really know what had happened. Not really. Uthman grabbed my horse's reins and pulled her to her feet. "She's bruised," he called out, "but no bones seem broken." "What do I care about the horse?" Mahmud muttered. His hands moved with gentle expertise up and down my arms and legs. "Are you in a lot of pain?" he asked softly. "You don't seem to have broken any bones." I put my hands on his arms and pushed him away a little. I didn't want him touching me any more than he already had. "I'm all right," I said. "I think I can stand up." "No, not so fast," Mahmud ordered. "Rest a bit. We don't want you going into shock." I shivered slightly, my arms still crossed over my breast. He stood up, took off his jubbah, and wrapped it around me. Uthman approached us. "The horse threw a shoe," he said. "That's why he stumbled." "Threw a shoe?" I was amazed. He was at the blacksmith 3 days ago. Wait till I get my hands on that smith. "Who is he?" Uthman asked. He was the smith both Uthman and Amin employed, the one they had suggested to me. "Abu Riyad," I said. Uthman shook his head. I don't understand. His work for me has always been perfect. Amin had made his way back up the hill very slowly, but now, at last, he stood behind Uthman. No one's perfect. Abu Riyad can make mistakes, just like the rest of us. Not in the practice of his craft, Mahmud countered angrily. There's no excuse for that. Nazir could have been killed. But he wasn't, was he? Amin said. There was a dryness, a coldness in his voice that sent a shiver through me, in spite of the extra jubbah that Mahmud had wrapped around me. Give me your hand, I said to Mahmud. I'll try to stand now. My prince grasped my fingers firmly in his and pulled me to my feet. I was a little unsteady for a moment and had to lean against him. But I wasn't hurt, only bruised and shaken up. In a moment, I could stand alone. You can't ride your horse, Uthman said, not without a shoe. One of us will lead him back. One of us will ride double with you. Nazir will ride with me, Mahmud said. Leaning on him, I picked my way gingerly down the path toward his horse. My legs were still unsteady, and I watched each step my feet were taking. That's why I, and not one of the others, saw it. Look, I exclaimed to Mahmud, pointing. Look over there. It's the shoe. It was lying in the bracken just a foot or so from the track. It must have tumbled down the hill from the point at which it fell off the horse's hoof and stopped when it struck the boulder against which it was now resting. See the shoe? Mahmud called to Uthman, who was behind us. See it? Over there, next to the boulder. Pick it up. What for? Amin asked. It's of no use. Horseshoes are expensive, Mahmud said. It would be a pity to waste good iron that could be melted down and used again. Uthman picked up the shoe and brought it over to Mahmud and me. I took it from him. I'll bring it back to Abu Riyad, I said, when I go to see him to complain about the job he did and ask for my monies back. I turned the shoe over in my hand and looked at the nails, jagged and twisted, from tearing out of the horse's hoof. But one hole in the shoe had no nail in it at all. Had that been where Abu Riyad had made his error, for some reason not hammering a nail through that particular hole? The idea seemed so unlikely I couldn't really credit it. It was simply too obvious an error for a man as experienced as Abu Riyad to make. There must have been another reason for the loss of the nail. Riding behind Mahmud back to the city, I held my body stiff, fearful that even beneath my shirt, my vest, and the jibbahs that covered all of that, he would feel my breasts pressed into his back. Actually, my breasts were so small and firm that it was extremely unlikely Mahmud would become aware of them as we trotted across the plain. It was I who was aware of them. It was I who was aware of every nerve in my body, aware of them in a strange, pleasurable, frightening way that had nothing to do with the scratches and bruises I'd suffered in my fall. Just as I was suddenly, or was it sudden? Had it not been creeping up on me for weeks now? Sharply aware of the strange sensations in my own body, I was also sharply aware of everything around me. It was as if all of my senses had been honed to a fine edge. Clattering across the plain, far from the sight of the sea, I could nevertheless smell the salt in the fresh wind that blew in my face. I could hear Mahmud's deep, regular breathing, even above the noise of the horse's hooves striking against the hard earth. I could see the snails crawling in the dirt. And when we returned to the city, to Abu Uthman's stable, I realized that Amin's horse was no more tired, no more lathered and foaming than Mahmud's or Uthman's. His horse had just as much stamina as the others, and if that was true coming back, it had been just as true going up. Mahmoud wanted to send his doctor to see me. Of course, I would permit no such thing. I assured him that I was fine, and when I dismounted and walked quite easily to my mare's side, grasping her rein in my hand, Mahmoud seemed convinced. Amin had led her all the way home, and was standing next to her now. It was odd, I said, keeping my voice very low so that the others couldn't hear. It was odd that a nail was completely missing from my horse's shoe. It looked as if someone had pulled it clean out with a tool. A freakish accident, Amin replied, calmly. An evil omen. You'd better be careful, Nazir. Perhaps your luck is turning. It might be a good time for you to leave Tira and gather your herbs someplace else. Accidents, you know, always come in threes. Well, Amin, I replied with equal calmness. As I wait for the other two, I'll be on my guard. I now know where to look. This one could have killed you, Amin replied. You may not be so fortunate next time. I looked away from Amin for a moment. Mahmoud and Uthman were several yards distant, deep in conversation with Abu Uthman's groom. I turned again to Amin. Why do you hate me? I asked. Hate you? What a ridiculous thing to say. His voice was empty of emotion. It was I who introduced you to the best society of our city. I who saw to it that everyone accepted a poor peddler's son as an equal, even the prince. Even the prince. And he shot me a glance so full of malice that I felt as if he had struck me. Then I understood. Before I came, Amin had been Mahmoud's special friend. My coming hadn't made any difference to Uthman. He had always hovered on the outskirts, and things were the same for him as they'd always been. But I had replaced Amin as the companion of Mahmoud's heart. He couldn't forgive me for that. I had no more to say to Amin. No words of mine were going to make him feel any different about me. All I could do to make him forgive me was leave, or separate myself entirely from Mahmoud. And for Amin, I would do neither. He meant nothing to me. Whatever I did, I would do for Mahmoud. About a month later, on a starless night, Mahmoud and I took our last walk along the quay. It was the night that I teased him and ran away from him, the night he chased me down the harbor side and held me pinned against the breakwater wall. When we parted, I said good night to him as cheerfully as I always did, but I had to clench my fists to control my shaking fingers. When I got back to the room, my own safe little room in Jiha's house, I bade the servant leave the candle, and then I dismissed him. I took off all of my clothes, every single piece, and then I stared down at my naked self. I saw the gentle swell of my two breasts, small but firm and high, with smooth golden flesh giving way to rosy nipples. I saw the slight curve of my belly, which would never ever be absolutely flat, no matter how thin and hard the rest of me might be. Beneath my narrow waist, my hips curved like two crescent moons, and between my legs black hair curled in tiny ringlets. I was a woman. I had forgotten that for a long time, and now I knew it again. Mahmoud had made me remember. I wasn't angry about it anymore. Being a woman hadn't prevented me from doing what I wanted to do, and I wanted to be a woman now, a woman who loved Mahmoud and whom Mahmoud loved. But I knew absolutely such a thing could never be. However much I might love Mahmoud, his love for me was the love of a friend. If he should ever discover the truth, he wouldn't love me, not even as a friend. He would despise me for having deceived him. Besides, how could he possibly love me as men love women? My body was thin and tough, not full and seductive. I could make jokes and talk about philosophy, but I was a maid, totally ignorant of the arts of love. What could I offer a man who could call for his pleasure any one of the 50 slave girls who graced his father's palace? If he should ever learn the truth and not despise me, he would merely laugh instead. If I had known in advance that my disguise would lead to such a completely hopeless passion, would I have put it on? That was an unanswerable question, but I wasn't sorry that I had come to love Mahmud. If Gindar and Jiha had taught me what it was to be a man, then Mahmud taught me what it was to be a woman. My love for him had taught me finally to know myself. Poor Amin. If he had only realized it, he had nothing to fear from me. He didn't have to take nails from my horse's shoe, or try to drive me away with talk of ill luck and evil omens. Soon enough, I would have to put that distance between me and Mahmud that Amin longed for. I couldn't bear his arm around my shoulder, his hand grasping mine, his face leaning close over the backgammon board for much longer. The tension would make me explode, and I'd better be gone before that happened. But I didn't have the courage to leave the very next day. Though I knew I would have to go soon enough, I hadn't yet become used to the idea of never seeing Mahmud again, of saying goodbye to him forever. A kind of lassitude seized me. I let things drift. I let them take their own course for just a while longer. For if I couldn't bear to be with him, or bear to have him touch me, I couldn't bear to leave him either. And he didn't know. He didn't know any of this. For the first time in the course of our friendship, I had to disguise my true feelings. I had to keep a secret from him. Of course, I had always kept a secret from him, the secret of my true sex. But oddly enough, I had never thought about that, at least not in the beginning, and not for a long time after the beginning. I didn't drift for long. The end came quickly, as perhaps deep down I'd known it would have to. Mahmud suspected. Perhaps Amin had encouraged his suspicions. I didn't know, and I didn't care. I only knew I couldn't tell him the truth. If I did, he must either despise me or ridicule me, or maybe both at once. I didn't know about the first test until I thought about it later. Mahmud challenged me to a game of chess. My mother had always said that chess was not a game to teach a woman, but how foolish of Mahmud or Uthman or Amin or any man to assume that just because women as a rule, don't play chess, that they can't play chess. I won easily. After all, I'd been playing the game against a worthy opponent almost daily since I'd reached the age of 10. The second test I recognized, and then, looking back, knew the chess game had been a test too. They took me to the vaults and urged me to admire the jewels. I exclaimed instead over the arms. Perhaps I went too far in my enthusiasm. Left to myself, I would have examined the jewels with a professional eye. After all, I dealt sometimes in gems, among many other things, and ignored the armor. In my heart, I cared for neither. But the third test I couldn't beat. From the third test, I could only run away. The moment I had known would come since the last night on the quay was upon me. After I left Mahmud lying on his supposed sickbed, I went to the shop of a tailor. This shopping trip was precisely the opposite of the one I had made in Baghdad a seeming lifetime before. This time I bought women's clothes instead of men's clothes. This time I spent without thinking, instead of haggling over every copper. Since I wanted the clothes to be ready the very next day, I had to pay a great deal for them. But it didn't matter. I had to be prepared. I imagined Mahmoud might recover from his illness with amazing speed. I went home and sat in my little room, composing a lengthy letter to Jiha, telling him a good deal, but not everything. I counted all the money I kept in a strong box hidden behind a brick in my bedroom wall. I had long ago paid back to Jiha my share of the initial capital for our venture, and since then we had been dividing all the profits evenly. Jiha had wanted to hold on to my share. "To keep it safe for you," he had said, but I was too wary to permit that. I trusted him, but only when he wasn't tempted. I put the box back in the wall. Then I went to the shop as usual. In the next couple of days, I made sure all my accounts with Jiha were brought up to date. By offering generous salaries and paying something in advance to their parents, I was able to persuade two of our young porters, Salih and Muzin, to accompany my sister on a long journey as her servants and protectors. I told them to get ready, for the departure would come suddenly and soon. When Ferris came to me with word that Mahmoud was better and longed to see me at the bath as I had promised, I was prepared. I went to the bathhouse well before the appointed time and left a talisman for my prince with the attendant. It was my white queen, the one my father had given me when I left Baghdad. It had brought me luck. I prayed it would do the same for Mahmoud. I left a message, too. "I came for a purpose," I said, "and I left for a reason." He would understand. And if he didn't, it didn't matter. He wouldn't be able to find me, if by some strange chance he should want to. Not even Jiha knew my real name, or the name of my native city. Gindar did, because it was Gindar who 3 times had carried money from me to my father. But Gindar wouldn't be back in Tira for months. By then, Mahmoud would have put me out of his mind.